My name is Rob Dodson. I am a developer advocate at Google. So today I want to talk about Polymer, right? Following on from Diego's talk about web components. But before I do that, I want to talk about Jam. And the reason why I want to talk about Jam is because I want to tell you a story which I feel like relates to our own lives as web developers. So a few years ago, some scientists did this experiment where they took two groups of people to a grocery store. And the first group of people, they gave them a stack of coupons so that they could get $1 off various items in the store. One of those coupons was for jars of jam. And so they led this group of people around the grocery store, and they happened upon a display with 6 jars of jam on it, okay? So 6 jars of jam on a little table, and the folks could, taste the jars of jam and everything, and then they were free to go do the rest of their shopping. Now, the second group of people that they brought to the grocery store, they also gave them some coupons. They also showed them a table of jars of jam, but this time there were 24 jars of jam on the table, right? Way more jars of jam, 4 times as many jars of jam on the table. And then they were free to go do their shopping as well. And what they found afterwards was they looked at the two different groups, and they were like, of these two different groups, who bought more jars of jam? So the group of people that only looked at 6 jars of jam, they ended up buying about 30% of them ended up buying a jar of jam. The group of people that looked at 24 jars of jam, only like 3% of them ended up buying a jar of jam. So it's like a 10x difference there. And the reason why I tell you this story is because I feel like as web developers, with all of the frameworks and tools and things that are in front of us all the time, all the choices that we have to make, we're a lot like those people looking at 24 jars of jam. My friend Adi Osmani wrote about this recently. He wrote this blog post and he said, when you're presented with an abundance of choice, you can feel really unsure if your choice is the right one. So basically, the more things you have to choose from, the harder it is to choose. This is called a paradox of choice. It's a really interesting scientific phenomena. And Adi didn't write this when he wasn't talking about jars of jam when he wrote this. He was talking about what it's like to be a front-end developer, right? Because there's just so many things that you got to know, and that's really overwhelming. And if it feels like every 6 months or every year there's some brand new thing that you have to know, and everyone's like, oh, you should stop using Angular, you have to use React now, right? Or you should stop using Ember, you have to use something else now. If it feels like that happens every 6 months to a year, it's because it actually does happen every 6 months to a year. So this is Google Insights. This is developers Googling for these different terms. So Googling for Angular or Googling for React. And you can see about every year, some new thing comes out, and everyone gets really, really excited about it. And then the old stuff that we were using before, right, these old libraries, we kind of taper off, right? We stop using them. So what's happening there? We're taking our old code, and we're just throwing it away, and we're like switching it over to some new framework or library. And we do this over and over and over again. And this is a really big problem for us on the web. If you look at Android developers, they don't have a million frameworks, right? You look at iOS developers, they don't have a million frameworks. If you need to build an Android app, you just use Android. So why is it on the web that we just have all these frameworks? Why do we have all these tools? Why do they keep getting invented? So it's an interesting question, and some folks who work on the browser, some engineers from Mozilla and from Google and from Safari got together and they were like, what is it that all of these frameworks have that the web platform is lacking? Why do we have so many of these? Why do developers need them so much? And through this process of looking at the different frameworks, they found that they all have an idea of components. It's a very useful thing for developers to be able to build components. But none of them work together. So if you make a really great component in Angular, you make like an Angular directive, you can't use it in React. You have to throw it away. You have to start over again. And so through this process, they came up with the ideas of web components. These standards that we could bake into the browser so developers don't have to keep creating the same things over and over again. And so in this way, web components are very different from any web standard that has ever come before, because the browser makers now are giving you the tools to decide what HTML should look like. In the past, if you wanted to add something to HTML, we wanted to add a brand new tag to HTML, like the video tag or the audio tag or something like that, it took years, right? Everyone had to argue about how it should work. Then we had to wait for it to ship in all the different browsers. Then we had to wait for it to ship in Internet Explorer, and then you could finally use it, right? It took years, 6 years, 7 years, right? With web components now, you can decide what the future of HTML should look like. So we're giving you what we call the primitives that you can then build upon to define your own tags. And these are the same methods, the same APIs that the browser makers use when they define their tags, right? So now you have that power. And because these are very low-level primitives, there's a lot of power, there's a lot of flexibility, but as Diego showed, it can often be a lot of code to create a component, right? And for that reason, web components were designed in such a way that we could build libraries on top of them. Libraries like Polymer. There are other libraries out there that help you with web components like Xtag and Bosonic. But the main difference between these and other things that have come before is that they're all using web standards underneath, which means you can use a component built in Polymer. You can use a vanilla JavaScript component. You could use a web component built using Xtag. You could use them all together in the same application, and they should all work because they're all using web standards. So what is Polymer then? Well, Polymer is just a library built on top of web components. It just makes it easier for you to use these low-level APIs. And the one thing that we really try to stress is we say that Polymer is not a framework. So Polymer is not like Angular, it's not like Ember, which is trying to solve a whole bunch of problems. Polymer just wants to solve one problem. Polymer just wants to help you build components. And then if you want to use those components in an Angular app or an Ember app, you can totally do that. Or if you want to build your entire application out of components, you can do that as well. So if this is the world that we're in today, where you have the web platform at the bottom, you have your existing frameworks like Angular, Ember, whatever, on top of it, and that's what we use to build our applications. Where we want to get to is a place where we actually have web components that are sort of the building blocks for our applications. And these can be, again, built with Polymer, but they don't have to be. They could be built with vanilla JavaScript, they could be built with Xtag, but you can use them all together. And if you want to then still use a framework like Angular, you can totally do that, but you don't have to. You can build the whole app out of components if you wanted to. So the next question people often ask is like, can I use Polymer today? Is it ready for me to use in production? Because it's been in development for a while, web components are very new things, and people are often unsure like where we're at with that. So I want to just talk about a little bit some of the improvements that we've made with Polymer over the past year. So maybe starting around version Polymer 0.5, we created this benchmark. And this shows the startup time for a medium complexity application, so an application that has a few hundred Polymer elements on the page. And this is from about a year ago. So you can see in desktop Chrome, we're doing okay, right? Lower is better. So startup time, so desktop Chrome, we're doing okay. Desktop Safari, doing okay. But as soon as you get to mobile Safari and you get to desktop Firefox, right, it just shoots through the roof, right? And that's not acceptable. It can't take that long for your application to start up. So we basically rewrote the library from scratch. We said we have to address these performance concerns. And so starting around version 0.8, we dramatically reduced the startup time for a Polymer app. So you see it got 4 times faster in desktop Chrome, 5 times faster in mobile Safari, 8 times faster in desktop Firefox. Now, the number here that I think is the most interesting is actually that we got faster in Chrome. Because Chrome, of the browsers listed here, is the only one that right now has all of the web component standards shipping natively inside of it. And what that means is, as mobile Safari and as desktop Firefox ship the rest of web components, those bars are going to go down even more. They're going to get even faster on those platforms, which is really exciting. The other thing we did was we cut down the file size. So Polymer 0.5 was like 121 kilobytes, which is pretty huge. And starting at around 1.0, we've now cut that down to 42 kilobytes. And this includes all of our polyfills. So we use JavaScript polyfills to make web components work in older browsers. So as those older browsers start to go away, you don't need the polyfills as much. You can get that number down even more. If you get rid of all the polyfills and you use just the most lightweight version of Polymer, it's about 19 kilobytes. So we're now really confident saying that Polymer is 1.0. We think it's production ready. We think it's ready for you all to start building applications with it. And within Google, we have now started to roll out some of our own apps built with Polymer 1.0. So Google Play Music is now built with Polymer, right? So this is a big project operating at very large scale using Polymer. There is a brand new site called Google Patents, So you can look up patents and things like that. This site is also now using Polymer as well. It looks just like the Google homepage, but it is a different thing. But it's using Polymer 1.0. It's nice and really fast. And we have a few projects that are going to be rolling out in the coming months as well. So within Google, we're starting to use it in production at large scale. There's also external companies like Atavist, which has built a really amazing blogging platform using web components. And actually, how many of you know Slack? Have you ever heard of Slack? Yeah, a few of you? Oh, wow, a lot of you. Awesome. Great. So as I was originally working on this talk, I saw this tweet from one of the Slack developers, and he's like, hey, we're going to rebuild the desktop client for Slack in Polymer. By the way, if any of you, he's like looking for developers. So if any of you know Polymer and you want to go try and maybe work on Slack, you can like track this guy down and apply for that job, which would be kind of cool. So yeah, we're seeing people use it. Also, Comcast, SpaceX, IBM, Salesforce. We have been talking with them. They're all building stuff in Polymer, which some of that should be public-facing soon. So yeah, we think it's ready. We think it's ready for you to try. And now that it's 1.0, it's nice and stable. The APIs are baked, so they're not going to change out from under you. So I want to walk you through what it looks like to actually build something using Polymer, just so you can be a little familiar with it. And this is not going to be a huge demo, but I want you to just get familiar with some of the basics. So what we're going to build is this very simple alert banner. Okay? Nothing too crazy. It's like the most boring component ever, but it will give you the basics of working with Polymer. You'll understand a lot better how to use it after this. So anytime I'm creating any web component, I always do the same thing. I create an HTML import, and inside of that file, I'm going to drop this bit of markup. So I'm going to call my thing alertbanner.html, and this is the very, very typical Polymer markup that you see. Every Polymer element looks the same, which is really nice because you can open any Polymer element and just read the source very easily. So at the top, I'm going to import any dependencies that I have. So I'm going to make sure that I'm loading Polymer, but you can have elements that depend on other elements, right? That's totally cool. So I could import those as well if I was using other components. Then I'm going to have this DOM module wrapper. This is going to contain all of my Polymer code. This is basically a very generic container that Polymer uses just to hold all of your markup. This just helps Polymer find your code before it stamps it out to the page. And I'm going to make sure to give my DOM module an ID that matches my tag name. So the ID of my DOM module is alert banner. And that's just so Polymer can look it up later when it needs to. And then, as Diego talked about, we're going to use a template inside of here. And the content that you place in that template, that's what's going to render on screen when someone uses your component. And in Polymer, we refer to this as local DOM. It's all the DOM that your element is in charge of managing and creating. Now, some of you might be familiar with the term shadow DOM, as Diego just talked about it. So shadow DOM gives you this nice shadow root. It gives you scoped CSS. It encapsulates all of your markup. It's very, very cool. It's very awesome. To make Shadow DOM work in legacy browsers, we were using a JavaScript polyfill, which had some major performance issues in previous versions of Polymer. So we switched to using a much lighter weight shim, which we've nicknamed Shady DOM. And Shady DOM gives you the benefits of Shadow DOM, but not the performance penalty. Now, ultimately, when all the other browsers have finished shipping Shadow DOM, we're going to switch back to just using Shadow DOM. But in the meantime, since we had these two terms floating around, we just refer to everything as local DOM. So if you want to, you can still use Shadow DOM with Polymer, but we recommend you use Shady DOM for the short term, just so you can get some really nice performance. So the local DOM inside of my element here, I'm just going to drop some markup in there. And that markup is what's going to render on screen when someone uses my tag. So I've got a div with an alert class right here, and just a little bit of text inside of it. And then a style tag to style that dig. And these styles are scoped to the element. So they're not going to leak out. They're not going to affect anything else in the page. They're only going to affect that one piece of markup right there. So that's how we're actually going to generate that blue bar, right, when someone uses our tag. Now, the last thing we're going to do is define a prototype for our element. This is the part which I think is super cool about Polymer, is that you make an HTML tag, you give it a JavaScript prototype, and it's just like a native element in that way. So you call a Polymer constructor, you pass it an object. On that object, you can have properties, you can have methods, you can make it fire events, right? Like any other object you want to work with. The one thing that is required is that little is property. And that's where you pass in the tag name, and you tell Polymer what tag name you want it to register in the document. And you note that that matches our DOM module ID up there, right? So again, this thing's called alert banner. It's registered. Now someone can just use that tag. They can just drop it in their markup along with the rest of their HTML, and they're going to get an alert banner, just like that, right? Pretty simple, straightforward. The thing that I like a lot about Polymer is that if you understand HTML and CSS and JavaScript, really just like the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can build components. You don't have to, it doesn't require like, transpilers or a bunch of crazy tools that you have to learn. It's just the basic languages that you're already working with today. Now, one problem with this component is that that text up there, I like hard-coded that. It's literally baked into the template for the component, which doesn't make it very reusable. I want people to be able to change that text. And so to do that, I'm going to replace this hard-coded content with what's called a content element. And a content element, it's like opening a little door into your element, and you're inviting content from the outside world to come in. And what I can do with this content element is I can, the outside world I should mention, we refer to as the light DOM. So the world outside your component, you're inviting stuff in from the light DOM into your element's local DOM. So I've got this little select attribute here, and I'm just using a CSS selector to specify what kind of content I want to invite into this element, right? So if there's an element in, someone puts an element inside my alert banner that matches that CSS class, it's going to render as if it's right there in my markup. So what this means is someone's using an alert banner, and they drop in a span that has that matching class, right? And now this text is going to render inside of the component instead of what I had before. So now you see some brand new text up there. Now this is really cool because right now I'm just pulling text in, but you could pull in other HTML elements, you could pull in other web components with content elements, and you can have multiple content elements inside of a single tag. So you could build a whole layout for a page that just has a few content elements, and the only thing the user provides is like a little bit of markup, and you just put it on screen for them. It's a really, really powerful feature. Now the last thing I want to do is make this configurable. So one of the great things about HTML is that you can take an element like a checkbox, and you can just add a single attribute to it and change its state. And I want to do the same thing for my component. And the other thing that you could do is that attribute, right, is mapped to a property in JavaScript. So there's two different ways that you could work with native HTML tags, right? You can do it all in markup, or you can do it in JavaScript. So I'm going to do the same thing with my component. To do that, I'm going to give it a properties object, and I'm just going to give it a shown property. So this property, this is the name of the property right here. And I can give it a few features. I can specify that it's a Boolean, right? So either going to be true or false. I can give it a default value. So anytime someone uses an instance of this tag, it already has this property and it's always false. And I can give it this notify true flag. And what that's going to do is it's going to have it fire events anytime this property changes. It's just going to automatically dispatch events so other components can listen to it. And this also means that we can bind to it using data bindings. So Polymer has a really lightweight data binding system built into it. And what we can do is we can bind the state of that property to our markup. So I can use a hidden attribute up there, and I can say, hey, if shown is true, this thing should not be hidden. If shown is false, this thing should be hidden. Right? So we're just toggling the state of that one property. And what that's going to give us is, here's our alert banner. Right? I'll slide it out so you can see. By default, shown is false, so we don't see anything. We add a shown attribute, and it shows up, just like the checked attribute on a checkbox. So this is really cool. Now your elements work just like native HTML. It's indistinguishable from the browser's elements. And that's really, really awesome. That's really powerful. Okay, so I've talked a lot about like building my own element, but one of the coolest parts about working with web components is that you don't have to make everything yourself. There are people out there making elements that you can just pull into your application. And so along with creating the Polymer library, we've been working on element sets. And our goal here is when you want to add something to your application, you want to add some new feature, rather than creating it yourself, you can just say that there's an element to do that for you. So along with the Polymer library, we had two element sets that we created called core and paper elements. And we have actually updated these in Polymer 1.0. There's now an iron element set. This is for basic behaviors, stuff like collapsing and storing things in local storage, stuff that's not quite visual, but it's sort of like the building blocks for other elements. And then we have paper elements. And paper elements are the Polymer team's implementation of material design. So material design checkboxes, material design sliders, right? Other UI components that you can just drop into your application. But there's more than that. We've actually been working on a lot of element sets that I want to highlight because not all the developers know about them, but they're really, really useful. And the first of these is called Google Web Components. So Diego kind of showed one of these before. At Google, we have a million services, right? There's a million APIs. There's over 250 APIs for Maps and Hangouts, Calendar, what have you. And as a new developer, it can be hard to get set up with these because it's a lot of JavaScript. And not everyone is comfortable writing lots of JavaScript if they just want to display a map on screen. So what we've done is we've turned all these services into web components. So if you want to work with a Google Map, or you want to work with Drive, or you want to work with Hangouts, you can just drop that tag on your page and start interacting with it, which is really cool. It'll handle setting everything up for you. And then you just can call methods on it if you need to, or change attributes on it if you need to. So really, really powerful. And by surfacing everything as elements, we have this really nice sort of common SDK that developers can work with. So that's the Google Web Components. The next I want to talk about are the Platinum elements. These are super cool. So there are new features that have been rolling into browsers lately based on a set of technologies called Service Worker. And these allow you to do offline caching. They allow you to do background syncing of your application. They allow you to send push notifications from your application. Really, really cool stuff that previously you could only do in a native app. You could previously only do in Android or only in iOS. Now it's coming to the web. And so these are really powerful APIs, but there's a learning curve, right? It's a lot of code to get them to work. So we just turned those into elements as well. So if you want to add a notification manager to your page, so you click that, and now you're signed up for notifications, right? It gives you a little thing there. It's going to send you push notifications, which I'll show an example of later on. You can just do this using Platinum elements, which is really cool. So we just have tags now. Oh, well, we have tags now that let you do that, which is awesome. The last set I want to talk about are the gold elements. These are for e-commerce. So one thing that we found is really difficult is filling out forms. Nobody likes filling out forms. Nobody likes putting their credit card information or any of that stuff into a form because it takes forever. So with the gold elements, what we've done is we've created mobile-optimized e-commerce form elements for you. And these elements are marked up with autocomplete attributes. So as the user starts typing, it's going to just ask them to just autocomplete their entire credit card field. This is also for other things like their phone, their zip code, but also their credit card name, their security code, etc. And what we found was people who use elements that are properly marked up with autocomplete, this is from like Chrome internal data, we found that they complete these forms about 30% faster. So the whole goal here is to just make it easier for people on mobile devices to check out with your application, get them through the process as fast as possible. And that's what the gold elements help you do. So right now, this is not the entire set, but the set itself is still small. It's still growing. But we're pretty excited to see what people build with this. Just through some recent data, we found, just looking at United States retailers, some big companies in the United States, about 85% of their mobile traffic is actually coming through the mobile web, not through native apps. And about 90% of their revenue through online sales is coming through the mobile web, not through native apps. So this is an area, if you're working on e-commerce, this is an area for you to really, really crush it. We're really excited to see what people do with these elements. Now, if you're interested in checking these out, you can go to elements.polymerproject.org. That is our catalog. So that will actually take you to this page. You can browse around. There's a little search field. You can just start typing things. It'll just like search for you by tag and by feature if you're not quite sure what you're looking for. You can browse the documentation for all the different elements. You can browse their demos to see all the cool things that they offer. And if you like something, you can star it, and it'll send you this little notification down here. It'll be like, hey, I saved that for you. And so when you're done browsing the catalog, you can actually go over to that sidebar and open that up, and it'll be like, oh, well, here's all the things that you favorited. And you can download them as like a big zip, or you can download them as a Bower JSON file, right? So you can just get this big bundle of components, drop them into your app, and you're good to go. You can just start working. So next time you want to add a feature to your application, instead of having to write that yourself, you can say, there's an element for that. And that's really the goal here. And that leads to kind of like this next thing, which is a lot of developers ask, like, okay, I understand the individual elements, and I think they're really cool, but how do I build an entire application using these things, right? How do I knit all these things together? And so to help with that, we've also created a project called Polymer Starter Kit. And Polymer Starter Kit is an opinionated scaffold for building Polymer 1.0 applications. So out of the box, what we're going to give you with the Starter Kit are application templates, which is really good because I am not a very good designer. My designs look terrible. So what we've done is we've been working with designers at Google, and we've been creating application templates that you can just start dropping your content inside of, right? So card views and list views, right? The projector it's kind of hard to see, but these are different. And different layouts that you can just drop your content into. I've been working with the team. We're actually rolling out a bunch more in the coming months, so a lot of really cool stuff there. These templates are all responsive by default, so we want to make sure that we have responsive breakpoints. So any of those templates that you drop into your application is going to resize properly on a tablet or on a phone. All of these breakpoints come from the material design team, and they're all very easy to access in the Polymer Starter Kit. They're laid out for you in a theme file. So if you want to, you can just go in, you can add, subtract them, you can modify them however you want. And speaking of the mobile web, we also want to make sure that your users are really engaged. So we've been adding slight re-engagement features as they've been landing in the platform. One of those, which you'll notice up there that the address bar is the same color as the background of the application. So that's actually a new web feature called Meta Theme Color. You can actually sort of change the address bar so it matches the rest of your app. So that's included in Polymer Starter Kit. We've already set that up for you. And you'll also notice this, this thing down here, this little banner that popped up. So this is a new feature in Chrome, right? That's not HTML that I wrote. That's actually just part of Chrome. And it's called a web app install banner. And basically, as users are using your site, if they keep coming back to your website over and over and over again, mobile Chrome will ask them if they would like to save it to their home screen, right? So it's just an icon on their home screen, just like their other apps. And there are a few requirements that your app needs to meet in order to get a web app install banner to show up. It needs to have a service worker. It needs to have a web app manifest. It needs to be served over HTTPS. And the service worker and the web app manifest are actually already in the Polymer Starter Kit for you. So long as you serve your website over HTTPS, you'll get that banner popping up and people can save your application and re-engage with it. And once they've saved it, we have a whole suite of icons. So that's the little Polymer Starter Kit icon there, but we've got icons for you in all the different sizes. So you can just go in, swap in your own branding, and then your app's going to look really nice on iOS, Android, Windows Phone, whatever. And the last thing I want to touch on with regards to mobile is offline. Because if you're building a mobile web application, it has to work offline. Like, native apps work offline. The things that you build should also work offline. We have the tools now to be that good. So one of the things that Starter Kit includes are these features that let it work completely offline. So notice I'm going to set my phone to airplane mode. I just refresh the page. And everything keeps working. I can open the menu, and I can navigate the rest of the website, right? But I'm offline. So how do we do that? Well, we have Service Worker, right? And this is insane looking. This is a lot of code. You don't want to write all this code, right? This is actually all the code required to make that work. You don't want to write that. But thankfully, there's an element for that, which is really cool. So using one of the Platinum elements, this is actually what it looks like inside of the Starter Kit. We import this Platinum Service Worker element. This is the actual markup that handles the offline syncing. This Service Worker cache element, you see here it has a caching strategy. So you can tell it that you want it to hit the network first, or you can tell it that you want it to pull from the cache first, right? You can also tell it if you want it to pre-cache things. So maybe the user loads to your website for the very first time, and maybe there's things that they have not navigated to yet, but you know that they're going to want them offline. So you can actually just say, hey, make sure the second someone visits my site that you save all these things so that they're available offline. So that way, if they start up your app again, those assets are there for them. So all this is handled for you by Polymer Starter Kit and by the Platinum elements, which I think is pretty rad. Another thing is push notifications. So check this out. Okay? So that was a native push notification that I just clicked, and it took me back inside of this application. So there's an element for that too, right? We've got a Platinum push messaging element. You can use this to add support for native push notifications to your application. So yeah, pretty amazing stuff there. And that way users can re-engage with your app even if the browser's not open. Now the last thing I want to talk about is how you productionize your application. So you've got it looking the way that you want. It has all the cool features that you've added. But now you need to like make it as small as possible, so it's as fast as possible. And we're really big fans of Gulp, the streaming build system. So we've actually gone ahead and built an entire Gulp toolchain for you that's available in Polymer Starter Kit. So we have support for code quality tools like JSHint and JSCS, also for unit testing using our framework called Web Component Tester. Support for minification tasks like Vulcanize and Uglify JS. Service worker pre-caching task for doing offline. And we've also included browser sync. How many of you have ever worked with or heard of browser sync before? How many of you have heard of it? How many of you have heard of live reload? No one? That guy? All right, so this is what it does. I'll show you. This is really cool. So what browser sync does is as you're working in your text editor and you hit save, right, it's just going to refresh the entire application for you as you hit save. But it's going to do it across every single device that you have connected to that one URL. So you can be working in your text editor, you just have the website open on your phone, like your staging site open on your phone, and as you hit save, it's just going to refresh on your phone. So you can just see changes very quickly on different devices. It also synchronizes scrolling and clicks. So as you're clicking in your desktop, it'll click over on your phone. And it makes it much easier to develop a multi-device application. So you get that with Starter Kit as well. So if you're interested in it, you can download it at developers.google.com/web/tools/Polymer Starter Kit, or you can just Google Polymer Starter Kit, and that will be much easier than remembering that URL. So yeah, that's how you get it. Definitely check it out. Even if you're brand new to Polymer, you can, you don't have to know what everything is doing in there. You just know that there's some best practices, but the other thing is, you can use it as a guide. When you want to learn more about some of these features, it's there for you in Starter Kit, so you can see how to work with it. All right, so to wrap up, Polymer itself, lean, mean, production ready. It's nice and fast now, so you can go build apps with it. You can create your own elements or reuse elements. Take elements from the Polymer team's product lines and drop those into your applications. And with Polymer Starter Kit, you're going to get up and running super fast and make it really easy for you to build these great multi-device applications. Now, I do a show on YouTube. This is what it looks like. It's called Polycast. So that's the URL down there, bit.ly/polycasts. If you want to learn more about Polymer, I put out a new episode every 2 weeks, and I just talk about building things with Polymer. So you can go and you can follow along, and I'll show you how to build apps. Because there's so much that I haven't covered. There's so much cool stuff. So definitely check out the show if you're interested. So that's it for me. I'm super excited to see what you all build. If you have more questions or concerns, you can check it out at polymerproject.org. And yeah, thank you.